I'll sit back and get comfortable.
Okay, we're ready to start. We are now recording. I am Mark Anderson with the Chattanooga Writers Guild, and tonight we are interviewing Sherry Poff, who is a long-term member of the Chattanooga Writers Guild. She actually joined just a few months after it started in 2001, and I'm so glad to have her here. She's become a good friend, and we attend some writing groups, a writing group together. And so let me ask Sherry to tell us more about what the Writing Guild, what Chattanooga Writers Guild has meant to you, and why you've stuck around so long. Do you belong to some writing groups?
Well, you know, back in, it started in 2001, and I had been in school actually with Rebecca Cook and Jennifer Hoff. She has another, is her name still Jennifer Hoff? Anyway, I had been in school with those two girls at UTC. We had grad classes together, and so somehow I heard of it. You know, this is previous to Facebook and all these sorts of things, but somehow I heard of it. I started going, and I was so impressed that the first meeting I went to, the author of a book called Grace in China was our speaker, and honestly, I think she was a Macaulay, I think, and I was just so impressed that we had writers, you know, that caliber of writers in Chattanooga, and I bought her book. And I think it's really important for us to, as writers, to support one another when we can. I can't buy everybody's book, but whenever I can, I really like to at least read what other people are writing. And so, I've just loved it.
Have you been on the board? What's your involvement?
Yeah, I've been on the board twice. So several years ago, I started right away leading a group, leading the nonfiction group that first year. And that group has gone through a lot of changes. And now we've combined with poetry, creative nonfiction and poetry. With one of the poetry groups, there's of course, a separate poetry group. So I started right away leading a group, and then somewhere in the first 10 years, I was on the board. Then I took some time off. Then in the last 5 or 6 years, I've been on the board again, I think for about 4 years altogether. And one of those years, I was vice president. So, you know, I have appreciated the work of the Guild, and I want it to continue. And sometimes that means serving on the board to keep things going. So, you know, lots of people need to do that. If it's something we value, we need to be willing to work for it.
It seems like all the great things in life do require a sacrifice that's always combined with work. And then we did the Chattanooga Readers and Writers Fair.
Right.
We did that a couple of years together. So tell me your background and writing. What got you started in writing?
Well, I've always loved reading. And my parents were storytellers, especially my dad, always telling stories. He loved poetry. He used to quote The Barefoot Boy and The Village Blacksmith, and his favorite poem was Tennyson's Crossing the Bar. And so we had that read at his funeral. And my mother wrote some poetry too. She read to us when we were little, but at her funeral, they have both passed on, but at her funeral, we read a poem she wrote. So they just really instilled that in me, that those were important things.
And the story we're going to read later involves your childhood
Right.
And you say clearly in there that you weren't from a wealthy family.
That's right. That's right. And yet we had my parents, and I have two siblings, and our parents, though we did not have much money, they bought a set of World Book encyclopedias, and then along with the encyclopedias was this set of childcraft books, and they deal with all kinds of different topics. But the first two were poetry, and then there was some storytelling, but you know, some of the first reading I did was those childcraft books, and you know, they have good work in them.
Did you dabble in poetry as when elementary school, high school? When did you?
Certainly high school. Certainly in high school I did. And, you know, I had a folder that I kept things in, and, you know, now I have many folders. But yeah, I wrote in high school and in college. When I was in college, we had a literary magazine on our campus, and I was involved in that. So, yeah.
Why poetry? Why do you love poetry?
Oh, man. It just says things in a very succinct, clear way that just speaks to me. You know, it's typically, unless it's a narrative or an epic or something, it's typically not long. It's kind of short, but every line, every word is just packed with some kind of meaning, and I just love it. I love the way it sounds. It was Keats who said that a poem should appear as your own highest thoughts, and should seem almost a memory or something like that. But anyway, that's the way I think. You know, there have been times in my life when I've just suddenly understood a poem or connected with a poem. And there's a Dickinson poem about light. There's a certain slant of light winter afternoons that oppresses like the weight of cathedral tunes. And I remember standing at my back door one winter day, looking out and thinking, this is that light. This is that light she was talking about. So, you know, it just really speaks to me. And I hope when I write, though I don't write the same style as a lot of the work I really love, I hope that I can do that for somebody else. Write something that somebody just really says, yes, this is what I think. This is how I feel.
Right. So you're an Emily Dickinson fan. Who
Yes.
else? What other kinds of poetry do you really?
Well, I really love all Shakespeare's sonnets. Well, I don't know all Shakespeare's sonnets. I love the sonnets that I know of Shakespeare. And then I really love Dylan Thomas, Robert Frost. And whenever I come across somebody who's still alive and writing, I try to write to that person. Everybody's online. Everybody's can be found. So a few years ago, there was a poem in the paper by a man named Thomas K. Smith. The poem was called Trust. And it just gripped me when I read it. So I went online and found Thomas K. Smith and sent him an email and told him how much I loved his poem. And he was very appreciative. You know, you can imagine. So, you know, every now and then I find new people, but I like a lot of the old ones.
Let's take a look at a couple of your poems.
Okay. Shall I put them on the screen?
Sure, let's try that.
Okay. Oh, it says it is disabled.
Uh-oh. Technical stuff.
Okay, these that I'm going to use are ones that were published in Foliot Oak about 3 years ago. Maybe 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. And
is it working? Oh, there we
yes.
go.
and there were 3 of them. So we'll just start with this first one. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. This is called The Last Swim of Summer. Pushing off from pool's edge, I knife the still water, part shimmering ribbons of lingering light. Below the chilly surface, all is silk and softness. Overhead, thin clouds languish in a pale sky, helpless to contain September's fleeting heat. The hillside is already deep in shadow.
All right. That is wonderful. There's so much here I just want to look at. First, I appreciate imagery in anything I read, whether it's fiction, the vivid images where I try to, whatever the author is put in there, they convey an image. And if I catch that, I feel like it's like seeing a movie. So when I read this, the image I get is so clear of swimming, and the words you use here, a knife. Well, let's look at the alliteration in the first line. Pushing off from pool's edge, have the double P sound there.
Mm-hmm.
I knife the still water, part shimmering ribbons of lingering light below the chilly surface. This is a beautiful way to describe being under the water. All is silk and softness.
Yeah.
So like right there, I don't know, I just kind of want to like, whoa, you've shared something with me. It's kind of like we're sharing an experience. You've shared your experience, and I just feeling with you there. And then you go on and explain overhead thin clouds languish in a pale sky, helpless to contain September's fleeting heat. Fall. September's
coming.
Fleeting heat. What's that?
It's coming. Fall is coming.
The hillside is already deep in shadow. So you've given us this image, and I'm like, okay, tell the rest of the story now. What happened?
Well,
but this type of poetry isn't like that. It's not going on. It tells a story. In a way, it's a very broad story, but this is just a snapshot of it.
Right. It just captures a moment.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think it's the kind of thing a lot of people knows what that knows that feeling. A lot of people know that feeling of, so 2 things are going on here. First, there's just it's swimming in a pool, and, the surface is cool, and underneath the surface, it just feels so good. But it's at the end of summer, and, there's kind of a common trope in literature that life can be seen as a year. And if life is a year, then summer is the the prime of life, right? Sure. Everything is growing and productive, and summer is coming to an end. And so there's a little bit of melancholy, the shadow, the sky that's pale, too weak to contain the heat. So, summer's coming to an end. And there's a little bit of melancholy in that. Well, but it's not entirely bad. There's some beauty attached to it.
Right. It is appreciation of beauty. And there was a couple of 100 years ago, a lot of the poets, they took a lot of pride in that melancholy. And they said, well, you got to have the melancholy spirit to be a poet. I mean, they overdid it a bit.
Yeah, maybe.
Let's look at another one.
Okay. And the next one has a similar theme to this one. It's called Keeping Appointments. It's one of my favorites. Keeping Appointments. Bright beside dingy orange barrels and heaps of progress, above rubble, above waste of the forsaken roadside, along blanched fences leaning into weeds, in the sorrow of late summer, weak light dying in the tired sky, above slime and debris of ditches sodden with overmuch rain, goldenrod waves.
So let's talk about form just a little bit. You
Okay.
have capitalization. Explain this to me, why you've chosen this kind of form, the capitalization on the first and the last.
Right. So really, if you just look at the first line and the last line, you have a complete sentence. Bright goldenrod waves. Bright's the adjective, goldenrod's the subject, and waves is the predicate. And all between there, I try to make it like a list. And I know there is a poem called a list poem. I wasn't, consciously thinking of that when I wrote this. I was just trying to sort of literally stack up the images of all the places where goldenrod appears. And so what you have there between the opening adjective and the end is just a series of prepositional phrases: beside, above, along, in, above. So it's all the places goldenrod appears at the end of summer. And the particular time I was writing this, now, I think it's a mistake to always assume that every poem is autobiographical. I think oftentimes a poet gets an idea and sometimes then creates a character, creates a persona, and speaks, through that idea. So we can't always assume that every poem we read tells the story of something in a poet's life. But this one really does kind of tell about, the title, Keeping Appointments. The time I wrote this, I was noticing everywhere I drove, it was late summer, I kept seeing goldenrods, and they're everywhere. And it was a little bit of a difficult time, a lot going on in my life, a lot of different places I was having to go, but these goldenrods kept like cheering me up. They were like these beacons of hope. And so that's the way I want it to be, even though there are, once again, we have this weak light dying in the tired sky at the end of summer. We have the melancholy at the end of summer, still in all these different places that are forsaken, places that are full of rubble, places that are slimy, and goldenrod still waves. It's still, there's still some hope.
So how much of this was like inspired instantly, you wrote it once, and how much of it was prolonged hard work?
Well, I can remember trying to come up with the right word. I remember kind of struggling with the word blanched, trying to think of the best word to describe, and the ditches sodden with overmuch rain. How do I describe these ditches and what they're like? So the idea for this one, it was just a gradual thing. It just was as I've lived my life from day to day, And then at the time I was teaching a creative writing class. And so I had assigned my students to write a poem and bring it to class. And so we were going to have a circle, a poetry circle, and everybody read. And so I brought one. I try to do whatever I've assigned them to do. So this is the poem I brought. And I loved it that when I read it, one of the girls just spoke right up and said, it looks like you're driving down the highway. And, she was right with the orange barrels and the heaps of progress and all those things. So So it worked. Sometimes, sometimes I think if we're in a certain mood, maybe we've been reading a lot of good work or something, we just have an idea that just flows. And then if we work on it too long, I think we can sometimes mess it up. But most of the time, it's good to go back and look at something. At least I think it's good for me to go back and look and really ask, is this the best way to say this? And that's one of the reasons the critique groups are so helpful, because then another person who's not inside my head can look at it and say, I don't know what you're talking about. You're going to have to, give us some help. So that's one of the values, really, of having a critique group.
And we didn't mention in the beginning that you're an English teacher.
Right.
And
yeah.
So how long have you been teaching English?
I've been teaching high school English since 2005.
Okay.
That's 15 years. Before that, I taught fourth grade, and I taught my own kids at home for a while. So I've been teaching most of my adult life one way or another. And before that, I was in school. So, I've been in school a lot.
Let's pull this, stop this screen share here.
Okay.
And your story. This is, we're going to read out of
This anthology.
In Chattanooga Writers Guild anthology. We try to do one of these every year. We have a spring contest, and then from that contest, the winners and runners up, anyway, we try to create a pretty nice little book. And so this is, what page are we going to here?
Page 29. What Mom Knew. Actually, it starts on page 31. The story starts on 31.
Okay.
Shall I read it?
You should read it.
Okay. What Mom Knew. I can't wait to get to your house. My friend Arlene smiled as we ran across the playground. She was coming to spend the night with me, my first overnight visitor in 6th grade. But I was not as excited as she was. I was worried. Arlene was rich. Her dad owned a service station, and her house was on a hill surrounded by a pretty green lawn and rose bushes. I had spent the night there and admired it all. Her nice upstairs bedroom, the soft carpet in the hall, and the shiny bathroom at the bottom of the steps. I was not rich. My house was at the bottom of a hill between the woods and the creek. Our floors were covered with linoleum, and the bathroom was outside. We had a big bathtub inside to take baths in, but when we needed to go to the bathroom, we went outside to an old-fashioned outhouse. My mom always said it didn't matter. People don't come to see your house, she insisted. They come to see you. As long as you're nice to them, they won't mind. I wanted to believe her, but the outdoor toilet was a big worry. I knew that most of my school friends lived differently. They would only see a small, dark building that didn't smell nice. They wouldn't see what I saw, that sometimes it could be a place to get away or to enjoy a talk with my big sister. Late in the evening, when it was dark outside and neither of us wanted to go to the toilet alone, we went together. While my sister was inside, I stood beside the door, arms crossed, looking up at the stars and waiting my turn. Through the closed door, surrounded by quiet, we shared secrets and told stories that no one else could hear. Arlene, I thought, would not understand. Sure enough, when we jumped off the school bus and started down the dirt lane to my house, my friend looked about curiously. We deposited our books in the room I shared with my sister and ran out to play in the remaining daylight. Arlene hesitated when I showed her the outdoor toilet, but she didn't say anything. I could only imagine the stories she would tell at school the next day. We stayed outside riding bikes until almost dark. When we came back in to take baths and get ready for bed, Mom already had kettles of water heating. I explained that when each of us had things together for a bath, Mom would pour in the hot water and then enough cold water to make the bath comfortable. This was very different from the modern bathroom at Arlene's house. Now she'll really have something to talk about, I thought. Let me know when you're almost ready, honey, Mom called. Does your mom always talk to you this way? What way? Honey. Does she always call you honey? I stopped and looked at my friend. Yes. Why? Arlene shrugged, and I thought of the evening I had spent at her house and how we'd had to sneak downstairs to the bathroom so that her parents wouldn't hear us and get angry. The next morning we woke to the smell of fresh biscuits. Come on, girls, Mom urged. You need to eat breakfast before the bus gets here. I'm not used to eating this kind of breakfast, Arlene confided, as we sat down at the kitchen table and enjoyed eggs, pork chops, and biscuits. I remembered the shiny counters at her house, but I couldn't remember what we'd eaten there. After breakfast, we gathered our books and hurried to catch the bus. The ride to school usually seemed long, but on this day, it passed too quickly. Oh no, I thought as we got off the bus. Everyone will see that Arlene spent the night with me. I don't want to hear what she's going to say. I didn't have to wait long to find out. Filing into class with my fellow sixth graders, putting away books, and taking care of lunch, I heard Arlene's voice rising above the rest. You all should go to Sherry's house, she announced. I braced myself. Here it comes, I thought. But my friend's next words took me by surprise. Everyone is so nice. Yes, I was surprised, but I shouldn't have been. It was what my mother had been trying to tell me.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let me just say, I love a simple story. What I love about literature is the shared human experience. I think you can go anywhere in the world and that story, we're going to say, yeah, that's a universal story in a way. These shared experiences that is something in your life, but I share that with you and we have something. And then I love the visual images and this book, this little story is just full of from one image to the next. My friend Arlene smiled as we ran across the playground. She was coming to spend the night with me. Can you see little Arlene with a smile, 2 kids? I mean, it's just,
yeah.
And, oh my gosh, that really, I think, sums it up. And I don't think it has to be what drew you to this type of these simple stories?
Well, I love reading biographies. I've always loved, I love a good novel. Sometimes you just need, to escape. So I love a really good novel, but I've always really been drawn to, I love memoir. I love biographies. I really love the personal essay. And this is a story. This is like a narrative story. So it's different from, just an essay, but stories, all our lives, it's just one little story and then another little story. Like a good story has conflict. So because I enjoy things that are true, and I like, like most people, I like talking about myself. So when I started looking for something to write, of course, the material I had was my memories. And then, I tried to put it together in a way that would be, as you suggest, something people could identify with. So I had to find out, okay, what was the conflict here? And I have found, and I think this has been, proven over and over. Once we start writing about a memory, it just unlocks something. And we remember other things. We remember details that we just wouldn't have gotten before. So I love that process of writing about something I remember, and then it unlocks something in the brain, and all kinds of other things come in. So, and there's so much in a life to tell about that.
There is. When you write these stories, and Sherry has many of them, they're in our anthologies and other publications. The editing process, like, did you have to go back and toss out some rabbit trails that were just going the wrong way, or?
Well, yes, because if I have a central conflict, I have to make all that story about that conflict. So yes, sometimes we find, and you've seen this in poetry, sometimes we find, okay, that's a great line, but I don't need that line here. Save that. I can't remember. I love Anne Lamott and I love Annie Dillard. And one of them said some really, I was Anne Lamott, I believe. No, it was Annie Dillard who said, don't save anything. Don't save anything good. Give everything you have, every story you write. Okay, that's true. But she's also the one who wrote a novel called The May Trees that's 200 some pages. And I heard an interview with her, and she said when she first wrote it, it was 600 pages. And the editor said, we'll never get this published. So she said she went through and took out everything that wasn't about that central story. So you do have to do that. You do have to say, okay, I've got one story here and I need to just stay true to that story. Because I could have gone, like in this story, obviously I've had other people come to visit my house and have various responses. And other things happened when I was at Arlene's house. And, like I could have brought in, but I needed to keep it focused on my conflict about what she would say, how she would see my situation, and then what she would say at school the next day.
I think that's very helpful to us writers, novice learning writers.
Well, we're all learning.
Yeah. Well, this Writers Guild, we have many of us are novice writers and we have some accomplished writers, but it reminds me of writing an academic essay and what I learned in college about the thesis statement.
Yeah.
And they said, okay, do your free write, all your study, and then go through, and every paragraph that does not address the thesis statement goes.
Right.
It has to address that thesis, supporting the thesis statement. And I think it's, in principle, it kind of works that way with stories, writing stories. Now, I don't know, maybe some people ramble and they go off on, but that.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes you discover things. So I'll start writing and think I'm writing about one thing, but another thing comes to the surface. And that's the real story. I've had that happen before too. Sit down determined to write about, I don't know, a holiday of some sort. And it's really something else that is more meaningful. So sometimes, and that's the free writing. That's the free writing you do, like you were talking about. That's all the prep work. And then once you figure out what the story is, you have to keep it in rein, keep the reins and keep it in check.
Do you have any writing goals, or what do you, just moving on here before we close?
Yeah, I love the newspaper, and I've always had a dream of having a newspaper column. And I've actually, written to the folks here in Chattanooga and sent them some ideas, and they haven't grabbed them. So, but I do read the newspaper, and read the columns and the opinion pieces. And I would love someday to have enough work to make a collection. But for now, I'm happy to just send my work to other people and let them do all the hard work, of pulling everything together and making I got this book just the other day. I put it on Facebook, so some people may have seen it.
Okay.
It's a really nice looking book, and I have one story in it.
Called
and
Nonfiction Food.
Yeah. So it's stories about food. It's another story about my mother in here. So yeah, I just, for now, because I am so busy teaching, and I think when I first started out, I knew so little about how to even go about getting a book together on my own. I've since learned a little bit, but for now, I'm happy just to contribute, to anthologies and journals and things like that. Maybe someday I'll have the time to pull things together, do my own.
We'll just pull together a collection of all these things.
Yeah.
And poetry and stories. I like that. I want to thank you for all you've done for the Chattanooga Writers Guild, and you've inspired me. I really appreciate your writing, and I think there's just a lot to be, some real valuable stuff there for our that you've contributed. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. I love it.
I can tell, and that's what we're like, and we want to see a lot more of that. Okay, I'm going to conclude. Thank you very much, Sherry Poff.
You're welcome.